It's a busy programme today. Back to the main story for you this morning, though, and the news that the Prime Minister's private secretary invited around 100 staff to a garden party at 10 Downing Street. And this took place during the first lockdown in England.
Well, two people have told the BBC that they saw Mr Johnson and his wife at the event, but he's declined to confirm whether it's true.
Let's discuss what this could mean for the Prime Minister with George Parker, political editor at the Financial Times, and Sonia Sodha, who's the chief leader writer for The Observer. Good morning to both of you. I mean, it's one of those stories to sort of really get your teeth into this morning. Sonia, let's come to you first of all. How damaging do you think this could be to the Prime Minister?
I think very damaging. I think, MPs have come back after the Christmas break. There's a sort of few weeks between the allegations that we saw before Christmas and, the new year. And then this story breaks. And I think this story is particularly damaging for two reasons. So we now know that there was this invitation sent out for this sort of socially distanced drinks to 100 people on the 20th of May. But it's really important for two reasons. First of all, we know that there are allegations that the Prime Minister was there, and they're from multiple sources, the Prime Minister and his wife, so he can't deny all knowledge of this, like he has tried to do with previous Downing Street social gatherings. So I think that's really significant. And secondly, I think this really is suggestive of a culture in Downing Street of flaunting the rules. So, we've had allegations about a 15th of May gathering, then we've had several allegations around Christmas parties in December 2020. And all this is building up to a picture of when people were taking huge sacrifices. And let's not forget, in May 2020, you were only allowed to meet one other person who wasn't in your household outdoors. There was no such thing as support bubbles. This was all being enforced by the police. There were lots of tweets from the police saying, remember, you're only allowed to meet up with one other person. You had ministers at press conferences reminding us of that. And while that was going on, while people were making sacrifices, while people were not seeing loved ones who were sick, while grandparents were not seeing their grandchildren for months at a time, we now know that there was a culture of parties at Downing Street. And I think that's why this is so damaging.
And George, does this feel different to the other allegations? Because the events that came out last year were sort of framed as work events. This is so explicitly social, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it does fall into a different category. When I saw the email last night, I thought, my goodness, I mean, the fact that the head of the Prime Minister's private office was organising a drinks party, bring your own booze. And the other thing that struck me as absolutely extraordinary was that while they were setting up this drinks party in the garden of number 10 Downing Street, inside number 10, they were having a press conference where a senior minister, Oliver Dowden, was telling the country that such social gatherings were banned and you mustn't do it. I mean, double standards here are extraordinary. And I think the fact that the Prime Minister was there as well, there's no deniability about that, although, of course, he says he's waiting for the outcome of this inquiry by Sue Gray, a Cabinet Office official. But to be honest, it does, I think, fall into a totally different category. I think the Prime Minister's in quite a lot of trouble today.
It's an interesting take on that, George. I wanted to put this to you too. There's a poll which has been taken by the Times, mentioned in their paper today. And it was of swing voters asking whether this did damage to Boris Johnson's reputation. And they said, overwhelmingly said that while those present should be fined if they broke COVID rules, they said that there were more important issues facing the country. I wonder whether you would agree with that and whether this is like a political story, something that those in Westminster will obsess about, but will it actually cut through more broadly in the country?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that there are much more important issues facing the country, particularly the cost of living crisis, which is going to dominate this year for many ordinary households. But then I suppose the question is, who do you want to be in charge of the country at a difficult time? And that's when questions about the Prime Minister's integrity and capabilities come into question. And I think this is a story which actually does, in the jargon, cut through to people. And we saw the public anger around Dominic Cummings stripped of Barnard Castle back in 2020. You can see the Prime Minister's popularity fell like a stone at that point. So I think people do care about this for all the reasons we know about, that while people were making huge sacrifices, people running the country were taking a different approach. So I think this is damaging for the Prime Minister, in spite of the fact, as you say, there are other much more pressing things for the country to worry about.
Sonia, it's more likely that it will be members of his own party that will bring him down if and when that happens. What are you hearing from MPs on the backbenches? No doubt you've been texting away.
Well, I think this just brings back the very angry feelings that there were on the backbenches about the Prime Minister just before Christmas. And, we've had sort of MPs briefing the press talking about how this isn't just, the rules being tweaked, it's the rules being snapped in half or broken in half. And I think that, those are quite extraordinary comments to be making about the Prime Minister, even off the record from backbenchers. And I do think it shows that there is a real level of anger there. And backbenchers have been getting it from constituents writing in, saying how upset they are about this, given all the sacrifices that they made. So I think it just adds to this growing sense. It's extraordinary, really, that just over 2 years ago, Boris Johnson won a majority of 80 and his party were really delighted with him. But the relationship between his parliamentary party and him is that, lots of people sort of backed him, not because they were massively enthusiastic about Boris Johnson, the man, but because they thought that he was their best chance of winning them an election, and he delivered on that. Now, there is a lot of concern that's starting to develop on the backbenches. Is Boris Johnson the right person to take us into the next election? And it's those growing sort of rumblings on the backbenches of the Conservative Party that I think no one would have really predicted just 2 years ago. And it's that will lead to, Conservative backbenchers rebelling against Johnson, possibly launching a leadership vote at some point, if they feel that he isn't their best chance anymore.
And George, just briefly to you, Sonia's touched on it there. Do you think this is survivable for the Prime Minister?
I think probably survivable in the short term, but again, it's just going to. I think the story, by the way, is going to be very difficult for the Prime Minister for the coming days, because there'll be questions about, did he mislead the House of Commons about the party? So I think this is going to be a slow burn thing. It's going to cause damage to the Prime Minister over a number of days. But I think probably Tory MPs will take a view on the Prime Minister's survivability after the crucial elections, the local elections on May the 5th.
OK, many thanks. So we will be talking to Edward Agard a little bit later on, who is the Health Minister. Thanks to George Parker, political editor of the Financial Times, and Sonia Sodha, chief lead writer of The Observer.